Welcome, everybody. Going to give it just a minute and then we will start our meeting. Thanks to everyone for coming. Hi, everybody. We're just going to give it another 30 seconds and then we will start. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I'm Renee Scott. I am the Massachusetts Pollinator Network Coordinator, and I am delighted to be joined tonight by my friends Tori, Antonino, and David Falk, and they're going to give a presentation on what to do with your winter garden or what not to do. Before we start, just have a few housekeeping items. We are going to have a winter conference this year. It's going to be entirely in person and in Worcester, and it's Saturday, January 13th. And that's about the info I have now, but mark your calendars. We are going to have some good pollinator content, so I hope everyone can attend. And let's see, our next monthly meeting for November is going to be the 28th, and that will be the last one for this calendar year. We are not meeting in December because that was the day after Christmas and it just felt too crazy. And then our January meeting is going to be on the 30th. So look out for notices about that. And then the last thing before we start, we are working on a pollinator photography show, and it's very early stages, but I'm looking for potential sites that might be interested in hosting it. It could be a library, it could be a church, it could be a storefront, something small. But we wanted, there's so much beautiful art, photographs, paintings, drawings that really draw attention to the beauty of pollinators and their plants. And I think it would be a really great way to get people who aren't already fully engaged with this whole native plant and pollinator movement to start seeing the beauty in it and get curious. So looking for places to host. Okay, so that was it for my updates. Trying to keep it quick because we have such a great presentation tonight. I want to introduce David and Tori. They are good friends of mine, and pretty much everything I know is from them, and things I get wrong it's not because of them, it's entirely because of me. So they are my guides, and they're very knowledgeable. And I think that I hope you all find this as educational as I do. Tori Antonino is co-founder of Green and Open Somerville. She's a local activist, ecological landscaper, and guerrilla gardener. She serves on the Urban Forestry Committee in Somerville and the Union Square Neighborhood Council. She is committed to regenerating the indigenous ecosystem to make Somerville a forest city where all residents can be connected to nature. Her proudest accomplishment to date is co-authoring Green and Open Somerville's native planting ordinance. David grew up in Brooklyn, went to college at Skidmore, and then graduate school at the New School in New York for philosophy, but switched to study ecology. He started with the Audubon Society in Vermont and then moved to Boston for an internship at Arnold Arboretum. He has his own gardening business for a few years and now works at the Native Plant Trust, formerly New England Wildflower Society, as a senior horticulturist. He works on ecological stewardship and sustainability and garden practices in both urban and suburban environments. In Somerville, he designed and installed both the Morse Kelly Pollinator Habitat Garden and native meadow and plantings at the Growing Center. And now I'm going to turn it over to David and Tori and take it from here, guys. Oh, sorry, one quick thing. If you have questions during the presentation, if they're sort of general questions, please save them for later. You're welcome to put them in the chat and I can ask them at the end, or if you want to just hold them for yourself and ask them at the end. If there are specific clarifying questions that you really, it's important to know in that moment, go ahead and raise your hand, and I will find a moment to interrupt them and call on you. Or if Tori and David, if you see the hand raised, feel free to call on them yourself. All right, on to you guys.
Well, thanks, Renee, for that introduction. Hello, community. How's everybody doing? I'd just say, if I really like to know where people are from, could people just put in the chat where they're hailing from tonight so we can get an idea, since we're probably not going to do introductions. I'm Tori Antonino. I am a resident of Somerville. I'm Renee's neighbor. And a few years ago, she and I formed Green and Open Somerville because we saw a need for more open space. And over the years that evolved into not just open space, but really focusing on our pollinators to the point where she, myself, and David, who are all on the supervising committee, were able to pass the native planting ordinance, which was a landmark here for Somerville, and just been very active now in getting our Somerville Pollinator Action Plan together. That's sort of our next milestone. And we just planted a forest this past weekend, so we've had a lot of victories. Yeah, tonight we're just going to talk about what we can do instead of our regular fall cleaning habits. And I'll just have people like make note of your questions, because I hope afterwards we can have like a robust discussion as we kind of figure out how we're changing and what we do and what's thumbs up and what's thumbs down. David, do you want to introduce yourself and say hello?
Sure. Hi, I'm David. I've been gardening for pretty close to 20 years after pretty significant career change. I can hardly remember. After, fine gardening and working my way through some landscaping businesses in Wellesley and other places, I basically found the garden trade to be not philosophically satisfying. And I was really driven towards birds and ecology. I came through the Audubon Society, actually, is where I started learning about plants and native plants specifically. But I started seeking out, gardening practices that were ecologically sensitive. And I found Garden in the Woods in Framingham. And immediately after finding it, basically introduced myself to the director and was lucky enough that they were looking for an employee. And so I've been there for 9 years now, and now I'm the senior horticulturist, and get to basically run the garden. And I don't know, that's all I do. So that's basically the end of my introduction.
There we go. All right, so yeah, I'll start sharing the screen, and thank you, David, and we'll get into it. Okay, this worked in our, just give me a moment. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we go. Get ready for a color change. All right. Nope. Renee, I lost it. Do you guys see it?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you. So this is a presentation tonight on rethinking the fall cleanup. In our upper left-hand corner, we have a woolly bear caterpillar, and I will get into the reason why that little critter made the slide in a couple slides. All right, so what do we got going on? We've established practices of what we call the fall cleanup, where we get out our rakes or leaf blowers, and we rake the leaves away and we blow them away. We make sure we pick up all the sticks out of our gardens and our lawns, and then we put it all in compost leaf bags to have it carted away. Of course, I'm talking to those who perhaps don't do that anymore, so we're becoming wise to our poor habits, and we're starting to adopt new ones. So of course, when we do these things like taking up the leaves and removing the sticks and twigs, we're getting rid of that much needed insulation. We're throwing away carbon. We're no longer building soil. We're getting rid of our pollinators. And when we use our leaf blowers, we're adding carbon into the atmosphere and creating noise. And when we do these things, and when people are visibly seeing us do them, it then creates this sort of like cyclical bad habit where, you know, you see someone, or at least growing up, like someone else was raking their yard. So my dad was like, okay, we gotta rake the yard, gotta get all the leaves. And when I'm telling you all the leaves, and he still does this, it's all the leaves. And so I've been begging him over the years to stop. And finally he said, Tori, I know you're right, but I just can't stop. So he and I have come to a peace, and he's the only person I will not put up a fight if he wants to leave the leaves, whatever makes this man happy. Anyway, so what do we change? So first of all, I just think we need to look to what nature does. And I think, you know, she really has it figured out. So on, this was last January, I was at a place near my folks' house, and I'm just like, my God, is this beautiful? And it is, it's gorgeous. Of course, most of our yards don't look like this wooded habitat, but it just got me thinking, like, what is it in humans that sort of like rejects things falling on top of each other or things being messy? But I'm pretty sure all of us would think that's beautiful. And then this overturned stump here, and I didn't get too close in, but I'm like, I bet there's somebody living in there. So I think that's one of our first steps, is just being like, well, what does nature do? Nature does not rake the leaves. Nature leaves the leaves. She leaves the stubble, which is that the stubble is, you know, after a perennial has shot up their flower, that stem or stick is called the stubble. And right, this picture here is in front of City Hall. Just guerrilla garden that a few years ago with Green and Open Somerville and the Growing Center. And this was in December of last year, no, maybe late November. And they now let it look like this. Not everybody likes it, but it's just getting into that consciousness. And again, why do we do it? We do it because that stubble is where insects lay eggs. It's where insects are overwintering. In the leaves, they are have oftentimes overwinter as chrysalis, as larvae, as adults. So anyway, so that's one of our first things that we do. Okay, these are some wonderful signages. I imagine people have seen them before. And this just gives an example, especially the one on the right, like what is living in the leaves. And it's so much of our, you know, soil microbes. And God, I would give anything for a salamander, and lightning bugs and certain spiders, and what I would give for a chipmunk. Oh goodness, I need to get out of the city. All right, what do we got? And here is a leave the leaves sign that Somerville came out with a few years ago for certain parts of our landscapes. Sometimes it happens, it works, and sometimes it doesn't, because it's still an adjustment, especially living in the city. So this next slide is Heather Holmes Famous's drawing. And that's the sort of explaining why we leave that stubble. So we leave the stalks, those flowering stalks, in the winter. Second image is cut back the flower heads, leaving stem and stubble to the varying height of 8 to 24 inches to provide nest cavities. Now, personally, I don't cut anything back unless it's somehow really taking the pleasure away of, or if it's like on the sidewalk. But if we do cut back, it has to be no more than I would say no more than 18 inches, because in the springtime, that's when you have your certain native bees laying their eggs in the stubble. And then those, it takes an entire year for those eggs to actually emerge the following spring. So anything, we cut back our plants lower than, well, according to this diagram, 8 inches, but I would even say no more than 18 inches, we're actually really hurting our native bees. And this is in from the Xerxes Society. So we talked about those overwintering insects, and something else that I want us all to focus on is when we're putting away our pots, like maybe consider keeping some of them outside. And I'm gonna, if you look to the right there, the upper right-hand corner, that is on one of my pots right now outside my house. And I was looking at it and I almost went to like flick it off because I thought it was a leaf. Turns out to be a spicebush swallowtail caterpillar chrysalis in its wintering stage. So I am not touching that pot. I will, right now it has a fairy garden in it. I think I'll put some red twig dogwood in it and maybe some cut flowers to, not cut flowers, but like twigs and things just to have it be somewhat festive. But if you see the picture right below that, that's a spicebush. I mean, that's a black swallowtail caterpillar, and that emerged on May 5th. And if you see that, you can see its overwintering chrysalis on one of those little sticks to the left. So that's a way one of our wonderful butterflies in the swallowtail family, they overwinter. They also have a green chrysalis in the summer. So anyone who grows fennel or parsley, don't chop those plants back. Don't chop the fennel back. If you do, look very closely for all the winter chrysalises that will be on there. Another beautiful one in the middle there, that's the morning cloak butterfly. She overwinters as an adult in crevices, in trees, in rocks, under leaves. And so that center picture right below, you'll see is the underwing, which pretty much looks like a piece of bark. So again, nature has its own intelligence. Upper left-hand corner is your eastern comma. She overwinters as well and has a very similar underwing. And that middle picture to the left there, that's those are our false milkweed beetles. That was taken February 12th. So they're there. Our critters are there. And then there's a pupa in that lower left-hand corner. So we leave the leaves, we leave the stems, we do it for them. Okay, so if we're not raking the leaves and we're not putting all our sticks and our twigs into compost bags, what are we doing? Well, we're creating art. We're doing slope stabilization. We're relaxing in nature. So I'm going to let David take it from here in 1 second. David, once I get to the next slide. But, if you need to move your sticks somewhere, you can move them into a brush pile, or you can start making wattles. And that's that center picture there. Just kind of doing some slope stabilization. That's on Prospect Hill in Somerville, where there was some professional wattles built, but they weren't enough, so I started my own. On the picture to the right is just some old grapevines that an artist has woven together to make this beautiful piece of art. And that picture to the left there, that's our own David Falk. It's I've called it snag art. And David, if you want to speak a little bit about it, and then I'll advance to the next few slides. And I think that's where you're taking over.
Sure. One of the things that I get to play with at Garden in the Woods is how to maintain a landscape that is that touches on the fine gardening aesthetic, and yet does it in a way that is ecologically sensitive. One of the most important things that one of the most challenging things that we are faced with is what to do with dead limbs that fall, or dead trees, or trees that we have to take down. removing coarse woody material from the landscape is highly problematic for a lot of reasons. We have a small staff, we have one small tractor. It's a lot of work. And it's also completely against our ecological objectives. And if we were to do it, we would basically be being hypocrites. We would be hypocritical. We wouldn't be following our mission in our practices. So, how to use woody material in a way that allows us to leave it on the landscape. And I try to get creative about how to leave as much of it there as possible. These are all the sort of fine gardening. I mean, you can like them or not. These are all my creations, and um, the whole point is to try to leave as much of that tree there as is acceptable to the public, basically, who are visitors. Um, but what you don't see here are like the big trees that have come down. The rest of that oak tree is actually lying on that hillside. And for the most part, what I'm actually doing with the chainsaw is trying to make a chainsaw cut look not like a chainsaw cut, but look like a natural break. It's actually called a coronet cut. It's a kind of a trendy thing in arboriculture these days to to create natural breaks or to create what look like natural breaks. And a lot of that is actually really, really important habitat. Those shredded logs, shredded branches. There's a lot of evidence now that actually says that a branch that naturally breaks is healthier for a tree than a clean pruning cut, like we're all used to seeing. The shredded wood that is left can often help the tree to compartmentalize the wound and heal itself over a longer period of time. Whereas if you cut a branch clean with a nice clean pruning cut, you've actually removed the sort of scar tissue, or not really the scar tissue because the tree will heal over, but you're basically making it as short a distance to the heartwood of the tree for an infection to travel through. So you're basically exposing the part of the tree that you want to protect. So anyway, that's beside the point, but it is also for habitat value. You can move on, Tori. The first slide that was back in before those was actually I took a log and I made a little bee house out of it, a temporary bee lodging by drilling different sized holes, and we left it there for about a year, and that's about as long as you really want to leave a bee house. But here on the left. That's what that was supposed to be. That's in the family activity area. It's more basically for kids to look at and check out. Often found sticks poking out of those holes, so it probably didn't really work very well as a bee house. But so let's get into fall cleanup. That the way we kind of have to do it at Garden in the Woods. Garden in the Woods is a really special place to get to work. We have to. So Garden in the Woods is a botanical garden that is owned by a rare plant conservation organization. So we are one of only a very small handful of botanical gardens in the United States that are completely devoted to native plants. And at Garden in the Woods, we are planting only things, for the most part, in at least 90% of the garden. We are planting only plants that are native to New England, the New England states. And we're also only planting things that these are all wild plants. So we're not using cultivars except in very particular areas. We're using straight species grown from seed that we've collected in the wild. with permission. But it is a botanical garden, and we're using, as a native plant garden, we are bound to be an ecological garden, basically, because using native plants, you don't have a choice. You are basically creating an ecological space, a habitat garden, whether you like it or not. And so it changes our practices, basically our maintenance practices to some extent. But we are still, because we are a garden in the middle of Framingham, which is an oak forest, a dry oak forest, we are managing the landscape for plant diversity in a very particular forest type. So we're looking at actually a picture of the coastal sand plain garden, which I manage. This is sand. This is a big pile of sand for the most part, but we're in an oak forest. And so every year it gets covered in oak leaves. I can't manage this as a sand plain garden, which is full of weedy little things that need to seed around. The oaks basically outcompete everything. So I will have to remove every one of those leaves for the most part, gently as possible, at least by spring. But just on the other side of the photograph, if you were to look behind you, I'm not touching it. I'm leaving everything in place, and I'm trying to do as little as possible. I'm trying not even to walk into it. And so that's the lesson number one, is if you're going to have to manage an area, try to pick an area that you don't have to manage, that's close by, you know. And this is a picture of the meadow, which is just down from the coastal sand plain, actually in the bottom right picture, where you can see the cart and the trailer there. That's actually where the coastal sand plain is. You're looking straight down at where that first picture was. But what I'm doing in this meadow here, the picture on the left is a before picture, and the picture on the right is basically an after picture. It's hard to tell the difference, right? But what I'm doing is picking and choosing what I can leave. I'm using this as an ornamental opportunity. We have visitors all season. We have some visitors in the winter, and even just for our own aesthetic, value and for ecological purposes, I am trying to leave this as untouched as possible. I'm trying to go in there as little as possible. I'm still walking through that entire thing at least once a year, and finding finding those areas that are sort of perfect, that have the grace of the plant, that where things are not smashed, where the plant material hasn't. So even though this looks like a wild space to a lot of people, this is very much a garden. And you're not going to find a lot of native meadows that actually have this much plant diversity in them. So it isn't really a wild landscape. And in order for me to maintain that plant diversity, I do have to pick basically the biggest, toughest things to cut back. When I'm doing my cutbacks, I'm definitely trying as hard as possible to use that as the opportunity to create habitat. There are a lot of bees, and it's especially our tiny little bees and things, wasps and whatnot, that actually will hibernate in those dead stems. But they're not going to be hibernating generally in the stems of those first year's growth. So they're actually looking for last season's dead stems. And so when I'm going through here, I'm looking for any dead stem that is still standing. I'm trying not to remove it. Even if I cut it, I will try to leave it on the ground. But I'll go through, because it's a garden with a wild aesthetic, and again, for habitat value, I'm leaving stems at varying heights. Some things I'm leaving 18 to 20 inches tall. Some things I'm completely leaving untouched and leaving those seed heads because they're beautiful and because they're next year's habitat. But it's really as much an art as a science at this point. You really are looking for, as you're trying to look at it at it at it as a whole nother kind of garden, and finding those areas of real beauty in it, um, and trying to highlight those with that sensitivity to the habitat. And those dead stems are absolutely key, even if they're laying on the ground. Which also goes to basically the raking aspect of this whole thing. There are parts of this meadow that I do have to rake, but I'm almost never going to be dragging that rake on the ground. I'm only going to be kind of fluffing with the rake. I basically have this whole thing to manage by hand, and so I'm trying my best to not, break my back or, irritate my carpal tunnel syndrome. So I'm gonna be doing it lightly, and if it's too light, I'll go back in and I'll take a little bit more out in spots. But I'm basically playing with what I think is going to be acceptable to our public first thing in the spring. The more of those seed heads that I leave up, the more of those beautiful grasses you see. Switchgrass in the foreground is a gorgeous plant all winter long, and it tends to stay upright, especially in certain conditions. Those are the things that I'm really looking for, to be able to leave in place. And hopefully I'm leaving big sections, probably 60%, at least 40% of this meadow completely untouched. I'm not even stepping in it. I'm not going to even get in there. Sometimes that's in the background, not as close to the trail, but there's certainly parts that are right next to the trail. It is really hard to see this in the photographs. I've removed quite a lot of plant material from the picture on the left to the picture on the right. Tarps probably fill that trailer with the amount of plant material that I've taken out of there. But we're also looking at some really aggressive goldenrods in there, things that are laying on top of other things, and probably not, serving the habitat value, the habitat the way we really want it to in the long run. Ideally, you probably wouldn't ever touch this. If you really are managing this for as true habitat, the best thing you could do is just to leave it alone and to accept it. And that goes to kind of, I think, my next point. Tori, you can go to the next slide. I want to argue that one of the key things that you might want to think about if you are truly trying to, this is actually just a short section of the meadow, and you can see the picture on the left I have already cleaned up. There's definitely quite a lot, but you can see that there's still a lot of seed heads sticking up. I haven't removed all the leaves. I've raked parts of it, but you can see the grasses on the front edge are cut, but they're probably at least 10 inches tall, maybe 12. And that's as clean as I'm going to get that. And I think it still looks absolutely fine in the spring. And the picture on the right, you're looking at two sides of the path. The side on the left, I'm able to leave basically untouched. I don't get much more than 10 feet in there. I cleared out a little bit around the birch tree, as a detail spot. And on the right side, I was more intensive and focused a lot on the grasses that got smashed in the wintertime. Actually, I think this is maybe a picture in the spring, but I'm not positive. I'm not sure whether this is spring or fall. But right, so I'll cut back the grasses, but I'll leave that basil foliage mostly untouched, because if that grass is serving as habitat over the winter, then our little caterpillars and things are probably well down in that foliage. Um, and um, and I'm just cleaning up the sort of the top part of it to try to tidy things up a little bit. So as I was saying before, I think that if you're really trying to work your way into an ecologically managed garden, I think you have to start thinking about design issues that a lot of us in our garden spaces haven't considered and haven't really prepared for. A lot of times we've chosen plants that are big and showy. I'll see people with hibiscus in their gardens, and these are big plants that um, it can be harder to leave untouched. And so I would argue for, it can be challenging in the nursery trade to find some of these plants that are easier to leave alone. But for instance, here, this is actually a picture of the growing center. A lot of that stuff is bigger than we want it to be. It's hard to leave, completely untouched. But the goldenrod's on the right. This is gray goldenrod, or Solidago nemoralis, which is a very common goldenrod and on the coastal plain, basically. And it's a short goldenrod with a big plume. It's absolutely beautiful over the winter time. Um, but it's so much smaller and less aggressive than the big common goldenrod, more common goldenrods, that you can leave it alone for the most part. And so trying to find that plant palette, or that mixture of sizes of plants that allow you to leave parts of your garden completely untouched, um, is key if you want to really, manage this for overwintering habitat. Um, so if you're going to use non-natives, maybe you can create smaller sections of your garden, or surround them with ground covers and things that some of the grasses and sedges and things that people don't often use in their gardens is really important. That's the habitat for the winter time. And some of that stuff can be left fairly untouched, with a slight trim, or not even any. So, a mixture of ground covers like wild strawberry can be aggressive in certain situations, but when it's growing underneath, a situation like this where you've got little blue stem and mountain mints and things like that that are, that can hold their own, you won't know that the wild strawberry is there, but that is creating a sort of a beautiful, clean base. So even if you are going to have to cut back things, if you're near a trail, or if it's just something that you need to do aesthetically, you can leave whatever is down there on the ground, and it'll look good, you know. But that's kind of what people are looking for in using bark mulch. Um, it's just the opposite of ecologically sensitive. So, how do you replace bark mulch, which is a tidy understory, is what you're looking for, right? That's what people are drawn to. Bark mulch is just about as bad as you can get for ecological purposes. It's almost as bad as the lawn. I mean, probably even actually worse, except that it's, maybe you could say that it's pretty good for fungus, but it's definitely not, helping, nature heal. So how do you replace it? There are certain ground covers, again, like the strawberry. There's an amazing, fleabane that is native to this area called Erigeron pochellus, which makes it an absolutely beautiful evergreen ground cover, and an aster family, a beautiful aster-like flower in the spring. That only flowers about 14 at at most 18 inches tall. So it's the kind of thing that, you know, it hardly ever looks a mess, because it doesn't get to be 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall, and fall over, which I think is what people are mostly reacting to. I think very often I find when people are coming through the garden, they love seeing the different colors of seed heads and the colors of the grasses. I mean, it can be just as beautiful in the winter as it is when they're flowering. Uh, what ends up looking messy is when things are in a tangle and crushed or not standing upright or something like that. So it's that sort of mix of plant characteristics that can lend itself to a upright, not too tall kind of garden. So sometimes if we, if I'm using New England aster, which is a huge plant at times. This year they're like 8 feet tall. New England aster is pretty uncommon actually in New England, especially this part of New England. You don't almost ever see it around. And really, it's growing with tall things. It's growing with tall grasses. It's growing with shrubs, with low shrubs. And so sometimes that woody material, those low shrubs, can actually provide a natural trellis if it's interplanted into certain parts of your garden, like low bush blueberry or I mean, I don't know, the list goes on, but there are ways to help support your plants to keep them from basically getting to that messy place. And there's also certain perennials that happen to have that really rigid kind of upright quality. Black-eyed Susan can be a good a good example. The mountain mints are spectacular sometimes for this, where they harden off very quickly and they can stay upright all winter long, and they support things. They support the habitat, they support the ecology as well as the other plants around them. Right. I don't think I really have the time to get into a whole like species list. I think that's really the challenge of this, is sort of to give you. I wish I could just rattle off some names. Pennsylvania sedge is one that people are very often know about, but one that people don't know necessarily as well is Deschampsia flexuosa, which is commonly called wavy hair grass, which is just as common almost in New England as Pennsylvania sedge, but it basically looks like fescue. It looks like a lawn fescue. It's a very fine foliage and it's evergreen and it's gorgeous. That's what that picture actually was, that first picture of the coastal sandplain. That's Deschampsia. Looks wonderful in the wintertime. Gets a little russety color, and that is a beautiful clumping native grass that is very common in our dry woodlands and in our open meadows and stuff. And with a little bit of trim of some of the flowering heads, which are really beautiful in late spring, but can often be kind of dry and kind of fall over, we'll cut back those old flowering stems, and you have this beautiful basal foliage, which is fantastic habitat and looks wonderful all winter long. It's a very short grass, hardly ever needs anything from it. Okay, Tori, what's the next slide?
That's what I have for the next slide. But okay, so
it is 7:45.
Yeah, whenever we have like David here, like whenever you start talking, David, like I'm like writing notes and asking questions, and and so the audience, I realize, also has questions. And I just want to, so I want to kind of fly through these next few slides and just leave time for someone, has a question about invasives that, so keep notes of your questions. I'm going to just kind of fly through these slides. And again, I want to take advantage of the fact that we have David Falk here and he can ask you questions. Like,
This
what are the
slide is
shrubberies?
not showing right. Tori, this slide is not showing correctly.
It's okay
What
to
does that
me.
mean?
Are others seeing it? Does it look weird for other people?
Is it, do you
It
see
looks-
the top? Do you see the top? Do you see my zoom on it?
Looks fine.
It looks fine to me.
Okay. 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 So I'm going to fly through these
Looks
next.
fine.
Okay. So these next few slides sort of like what do we do instead of taking away the leaves? Like, what do? We plant. This is my van that's Pearl, filled with plants from the Oak Haven Nursery, Walter Kittredge's place in Reading. Wonderful little local nursery, still selling plants. So that's what we do. We plant a lot. Oh, my slide. Oh, there we go. What do we plant? We plant forests. This is this past weekend, Somerville planted its first Miyawaki forest with from the encouragement of Renee and David, Lisa Burglaccio, Lee Munier, and a host of other activists. And the city said, okay, yeah, we're going to do that. And and did it. And then there's Danhe Park on the right. What do? We decorate. There's again, Somerville City Hall, little display. All in the back there, that was all crimson-eyed rose mallow. And it was able to, it can be kind of take over in a small area, but where the City Hall is, it put on a show this past August. And there in the right is I leave my baskets and pots out year round because there's probably more chrysalises in them and on them. So I just my client had hydrangea seed heads and I was like, oh, or flower heads, and she let me take them. So we decorate, we propagate. Virginia creeper, it is getting underneath my client's cedar shingles, so I need to remove it. But right now is a great time if I remove it, I'll just plant it in parts of my yard or in Renee's yard. Guess what, Renee? We have Virginia creeper. And there's a beautiful seed head. And I know there's also a seed sharing happening soon, so maybe people can touch on that. That is, of course, milkweed. I wait all year to get that. I think is one of the most beautiful fall and winter interest plants we have. And observe. So this is a time where we need to ramp up our citizen science because we have climate change and we need to educate and we need to learn. Again, to the left, that's our false milkweed friend on some spent clematis, Clematis virginiana. To the right, that is a hooded owlet caterpillar that was taken less than a week ago on goldenrod. And that little thing in the middle on dogwood, that marshmallow is a invasive praying mantis egg case. So if you see those marshmallows, you just take them and put them in the freezer, throw them away, put them in alcohol. Anyway, we observe and we embrace the aesthetic. Here's some winter photos. One is at Garden in the Woods. This one in the middle is at Prospect Hill. They planted a bayberry. How gorgeous is that? And just some seed heads poking through the snow. And I believe that is it for the fall presentation. For our presentation. And what I want to know from you is what are your fall practices? And I want to know your questions. And my other question was, how do we convince our neighbors? Like barring my dad, how do we convince our neighbors that this is the way to go? Thank you so much.
Thank you both. This was terrific. We did have a question about keeping invasives from moving in, and if you have them, how do you get rid of them? And then a second part of that question from someone else was especially mugwort. They are tapping, I guess they're tarping and solarizing, and they're going to install native perennial pollinators that have had the year to grow. And then, so anyway, do you have thoughts on invasives? Is there any specific benefit to removing them in the fall? Are they easier to see? Are they harder to see? I kind of feel like I see them more in the spring and summer, but I also am not necessarily looking for them in the winter. So do you guys, either of you have thoughts about that?
Well, I would, the invasives thing is a really tough question. Actually reminds me of something that I kind of wanted to bring up earlier, but particularly with mugwort, I think mugwort's kind of shallow rooted. I almost would encourage you to remove that topsoil. It is an incredibly difficult plant to get rid of. When you are planting a native garden, especially something that you are trying to manage as lightly as possible, you really want to spend the time to prepare the site properly. You need to make sure that mugwort is gone, because it will either take over. I mean, it may not outcompete things, but it'll mean that you will have to be in there ripping it out, which is going to cause all kinds of trouble with the plants that you do want in there, obviously, and everything else. So what I did forget to talk about was actually soil. One of the things that people, are faced with very commonly in our home landscapes is improved soil. We've all taken the time to make our soil as good as possible, and that's actually pretty problematic when it comes to managing a native wildflower meadow, native New England meadow anyways. Our plants are adapted to really poor soils and disturbance, and absolutely do wonderfully where the soil is basically mineral soil. So after a fire and the topsoil is burned off, or after a glacier and everything has been scoured away, sand, gravel, poor nutrition, and our plants generally look, I mean, this is very general because our landscapes are very diverse, but look best. And one of the things about these poor soils is that your plants won't get quite as huge. So again, like I was talking about the switchgrass, which is a gorgeous grass. It is a gorgeous grass, but if you put it in regular old garden soil, it is 5 feet tall and aggressive. And it often doesn't look nearly as good. It just doesn't get the fall colors. It doesn't get colors. And that's often what you see with our wild natives, is that when the soil is too good, they just don't develop their stress responses, and the stress responses are actually where the colors come from. And so if you want your stuff to look good, giving them as little as you can is kind of the way to go in a lot of cases. And the other side of the coin is basically all the invasive stuff, all the non-native things that are so competitive. One of the things that gives them the competitive advantage is that they are simply adapted to taking advantage of that available nutrition, whereas the natives don't really know what to do with it as well. So you get in, this is what happens in Somerville when the city goes and plants a pollinator garden, is they put this gorgeous soil down that they've spent so much money on, and the natives are okay, but they look like, they certainly aren't competing with the 6 foot tall wild lettuces and things that seed right in, and it's an annual plant that gets to be a monster, and that's where you can't help but manage it. You can't help but overmanage it. And so dealing with those site conditions beforehand, and if you can, thinning your soil instead of enriching it. So resist compost, resist buying in loam, just use sand if you can, something like that. I mean, it's cheaper, it seems counterintuitive, but if this is what the direction you're going with your landscape, it can be really good for your body and mind.
It looks like we have a question about praying mantis egg case. You'd mentioned, Tori, refrigerating or putting in alcohol. What is the goal? And Anna, let's see. You had a visitor at your table when you were tabling, asking about native praying mantises. They wouldn't survive. So I think you're asking, are there native praying mantises in southern or coastal Massachusetts?
Yes, I believe the Carolina praying mantis is native to our area. My reason for showing that slide under like making observations is because the Chinese praying mantis, that bright, beautiful green creature that we think of when we see praying mantis is I'd say if it's not yet labeled invasive, it's becoming invasive and is I mean, it's a bit of a beast. And so yeah, to kill. The reason I showed the slide, the reason I showed the egg was to identify and then to get rid of the egg. Does that make sense? And also people can raise their hands and also unmute themselves and say hello. And I'd love to see your faces. I see Amy. Hi, and Dorothy.
We have a few more minutes. I know Tori and David had offered to stick around a few extra minutes if we have more questions. So I would say if you have questions, raise your hands now so we stay on. Okay, it looks like maybe we have no questions.
Yeah, and also, does anyone want to share like what you've been up to? How you've changed your practices? Are you telling your neighbors? Are your neighbors starting? Is it catching? Are we there yet? Can we rest? Take naps?
I have a question. I always hear about leaving some bare ground for nesting bees, but how much do you recommend? And do you actually is it truly bare, or is it just sort of underneath some plants? If it's bare, does it need full access to the sunlight? Can you explain that a little bit more?
It depends. You can observe if you leave a patch of bare soil, sandy soil especially, you start seeing holes in it. It depends on what, like wasps. There's ground nesting bees. There's especially wasps that will nest in the ground, and you'll see holes. You'll see them dragging a paralyzed caterpillar down there. And that's great, but they're not in everybody's landscape. It is definitely is a great thing to add to a pollinator garden, a habitat garden, a pile of rocks, a pile of branches, a pile of debris that you can discreetly tuck in somewhere. That's all great habitat. All kinds of things nest in there. Not just yellow jackets.
I've got a question for you.
Mhm.
I maintain 5 or 6 pollination gardens in Framingham, Northborough, and Worcester, and I'm the only one maintaining it. So I tend to, when I'm finished collecting seed, I deadhead, and I do leave the stems like you talked about, but I deadhead. And when I'm reading these native plant blogs and Facebook groups, they all say don't deadhead because of the birds, but I'm afraid to not deadhead because I'm the only one weeding, and I'm not going to keep up. Is that
Sure.
is that
So
baseless, or?
absolutely, it depends on the species that you're deadheading, whether or not birds are really. If you see birds on them, you can deadhead 2/3 and leave a third. One of the things about a habitat garden that is something that I try to work towards is a dense enough community of plants that it reaches a certain kind of stasis. And so, you may be fighting against yourself if you have bare ground that things are seeding into. again, it depends on your species. Like, you know, the aggressive goldenrods are going to seed into anywhere. So maybe you would choose to edit out certain things that you need to manage that heavily, or you just know which things you do need to deadhead, or else they will take over. But again, I think it just really depends on, you know, knowing which species you can't let go of, and which ones are, you know, most attractive to birds. Black-eyed Susans, you know, you always see goldfinches and things on black-eyed Susans, and they're hardly so aggressive that you'd have to worry about it, I think. Monarda is a nice one that, you know, I mean, some Monardas can be pretty aggressive, but, you know, it just comes down to the species, I think. But I, you know, definitely if I were to if I knew I had to manage some of it, I would probably try to take, you know, leave a little bit.
Okay, just one follow-up question. The dust-like seeds, the real tiny seeds, the birds don't eat those, do they? I think of blue lobelia. Those seeds are like dust.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, little warblers and things. I just, I don't know. It's possible.
Any other questions that people have that they want to ask themselves? We have a couple in the chat, but if you want to ask a question yourself, yeah, Maria?
I just have a comment. I have an area in the front of my yard along the road that has all of the trees, and they would fall so thickly onto the lawn in that area that I really did need to remove some of them. So basically, I gave it a lot of thought, and what I ended up doing this last year was carving out like a whole 20-foot border down there and cardboarding it and mulching it so that now the leaves can just fall onto that area and I don't have to do anything with them. They can, I mean, it was a huge effort, I have to tell you. I mean, it was like 150 feet and oh my God, you know, it was 20 yards of mulch. And
Lawn isn't easy to get rid of, but that lawn wasn't serving anybody.
no, I know that, but I'm just saying it was a lot of work. But now I do not have to do anything with those leaves. They can just fall and
Beautiful.
support all kinds of whatever.
David, there's a request that your species list gets shared. Do you have that handy? Maybe, or is it the one on?
I do. I have them at work that I could send you some lists.
Okay, great, and I can share that with the group. Tori, is the seed sharing question what you just posted in the chat?
Yes, it's a seed sharing bee in Arlington, and I don't know if this link is going to lead people there. It's a Sign Up Genius. This might be a better link. So it's through Mystic Charles Pollinator Pathways group. And it's on the 12th. It's on Sunday the 12th. So hopefully that works.
Okay, thank you. Janet has a question. There was a question about using Jerusalem artichokes to outcompete Japanese knotweed, and then Janet asks, or says, I fought Japanese knotweed and allowed Virginia creeper to take over. Will it hurt the oak trees it's climbing? I'm assuming that you mean the Virginia creeper. Should you cut back to protect the oaks? And Tori, you're saying
no.
Yeah, the first thing, I've never seen anything compete with Japanese knotweed, but you can try with Jerusalem artichoke. That would be really cool if that worked. Virginia creeper is a fantastic liana that doesn't you won't see it behave the way invasive vines do, which is tear down branches. If that is, if it can be a very aggressive ground cover, it is a spectacular habitat plant. It has great fruit for fall migrating birds, amazing fall color. I have not seen Virginia creeper be at nearly as damaging to the trees that it's growing in, as a lot of other vines that people plant. It just doesn't. It stays fairly. It just stays kind of sparse at the top. It doesn't get as heavy, and I think because of the climbing suckers that it has, it doesn't seem to weigh down the branches and snap them like. Particularly, I'm thinking of Asiatic bittersweet, which will just break the trees. It just gets too heavy and big. But I haven't really seen Virginia creeper have that effect. If it's an evergreen tree, Virginia creeper can be kind of problematic because it will basically smother a pine tree or a spruce or something like that.
I do want to add that I won with the Japanese knotweed, but it took a long time. And
Oh.
I 1 year I tried a little bit of Roundup and it did nothing, but just persistent pulling of the knotweed weakened the root. And it was, 30, 40 feet of knotweed over time. And I had to learn to take an aggressive native and to take an aggressive native to battle an aggressive invasive. And anyway, I want to say I won by myself.
Congratulations.
So can be done.
Can I ask you about that, Janet? Did you use Virginia creeper? I'm using a number of different things, and I have some Virginia creeper growing near the Japanese knotweed, and the knotweed does not go near or invade the Virginia creeper.
The Virginia creeper came from another area on its own. Goldenrod also and mayapple are the three sort of virulent natives that are elbowing out the Virginia creeper, and the deer.
Elbowing out the Japanese knotweed, you mean?
Yes,
Or,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So I'm pulling persistently, but pulling alone wasn't successful. Pulling, but in having something native that could compete with that speed of growth was how I won.
One thing that I've heard about Japanese knotweed removal is if you basically mow it for a few years at least to weaken it, but what you do is you let it grow as tall as it will grow until it starts putting those first leaves out. So it's used as much of the energy in its roots as possible before being able to really photosynthesize, before it really leaves out. You cut it then. So if you plant something with it that's going to compete, you want to plant something that won't interfere with you cutting the Japanese knotweed when it gets to a certain height. The Japanese knotweed is probably going to be about 3 feet tall before it actually leaves out. That's when you cut it. So you have to have some patience. And supposedly that's how you exhaust it the fastest.
I had little boys who were fighting it. Yeah.
Oh, there's a group in Connecticut called Nix the Knotweed, and they have groups going around to public lands, cutting and then planting competitors. And they do it 3 times a summer. They do it when it first comes, they do it in the middle, and they have volunteers. And then they do it I'm trying to think of when the last time is they do it. But is that better than doing it, waiting till the end, David, or?
Right. Definitely cut it before it can photosynthesize. But yes, it means that you do it, 2 or 3 times a year, probably.
Now I've had a bunch of them growing up, and I last cut it the end of beginning of September, and now I can see them growing up again. I'm wondering whether I could cut it. It's not that big an area. Is that a good idea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As
Okay,
often
thank
as
you.
can, that's how you start it.
Okay, thanks. Congratulations, Janet.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Yes, congratulations.
I'm only mentioning it because it is such a discouraging plant, and
Mhm.
but you can win.
And I've heard it's a very beneficial plant in so many ways, that it's edible, that it has all these medicines, but really not helpful for us here.
I think the
Well,
Army.
everybody, oh, David, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the Army Corps of Engineers used it as a slope stabilization after site disturbance and stuff. It's got a ton of wonderful qualities. It just doesn't fit in our
Right,
Yeah.
right.
ecosystem, I'm afraid.
David and Tori, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I know there were a few questions we didn't get to. If your question was not answered, or if you have additional questions, feel free to email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and then I would be happy to get the answers, to pass them on to Tori and David and get answers for you. So please don't hesitate to ask me, even if you already wrote it down. If you feel like it wasn't answered, please email me again, just so it's top of my list. Thank you all. This was really great conversation. I really appreciate you two coming and talking to us. And I will see everybody November 28th. And then we have December off. So thanks all.
Thanks,
Good night.
all. Good night, everybody.
And David, if you'll send me the list, I'll share it with everybody.
Will do.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.